First contact with honor. Scout Commander Zixtal of the Galactic Federation vessel, Eternal Seeker, had witnessed countless first contacts across the spiral arms, but none quite like this. The debris field stretched before them like a metallic graveyard, fragments of what was once a massive colony vessel scattered across the void. Behind it, the attacking vessels of the notorious Scared Dominion were retreating, their weapon signatures still radiating heat into space. Life signs detected, Commander, reported Senior Sensor Officer Venn. Multiple clusters. They appear to be escape pods. Zixtal's crystalline body shifted colors, reflecting their concern. The Scared Dominion's reputation for brutality was well known, yet they had withdrawn before completely destroying their prey. Unusual. Bring us closer, Zixtal ordered. Prepare emergency protocols. As they approached, their sensors revealed dozens of escape pods, each designed to hold up to 20 occupants. The pods' trajectories seemed random at first glance, but Zixtal's experienced eye noticed a pattern. The furthest clusters had launched first, while those nearest to the wreckage had departed last. Establish communication with the nearest pod, Zixtal commanded. After several moments, a tired human voice responded. This is Lieutenant Sarah Chen of the Earth colonial vessel New Horizon. Thank you for responding to our distress signal. Lieutenant, I am Scout Commander Zixtal. We stand ready to assist. What is your situation? There was a pause before Chen responded, her voice steady despite obvious exhaustion. We have approximately 800 survivors across 42 escape pods. Our primary vessel, the New Horizon, was attacked without warning by unknown hostiles. Zixtal's surface rippled with confusion. 800. Our scans indicated your colony vessel had a complement of over 2,000. Yes, Commander. We couldn't save everyone. As the Eternal Seeker began recovery operations, Zixtal noticed something profound. The escape pods they retrieved first contained primarily young humans, their elderly, and those they called women. The later pods held mostly adult males, many wearing what appeared to be crew uniforms. In the medical bay, Lieutenant Chen sat with a small human child in her lap while speaking with Zixtal. Her uniform was stained with hydraulic fluid, and a bandage covered a burn on her forearm. I don't understand, Zixtal admitted. Our records show that human females typically possess less physical strength than males. Your young are completely dependent. The elderly have passed their prime, yet you evacuated them first, while leaving your strongest to face destruction. Chen looked down at the sleeping child, her expression soft yet determined. It's an old rule of our people, Commander. Women and children first. It goes back centuries, to when we still sailed wooden ships on Earth's oceans. But why? It defies logical survival strategy. In times of crisis, most species prioritize their strongest, their leaders, their warriors. Because they are our future, Chen replied simply. Because every child holds unlimited potential. Because our elderly carry our wisdom and history. Because we measure the strength of our civilization, not by how we treat our powerful, but by how we protect our vulnerable. Zixtal's crystalline form shifted through a spectrum of colors as they processed this. Your crew, they chose to stay behind. They did their duty, Chen said quietly. Captain Rodriguez made sure the last pods launched before. She stopped, composing herself. We protect our own, all of our own, even if it means sacrificing ourselves. The medical bay hummed quietly as Zixtal contemplated this. Around them, human children played in a makeshift recreation area while their parents rested. Elderly humans shared stories with younger ones. The scene was unlike anything in Zixtal's extensive experience with refugee situations. Your species continues to surprise us, Lieutenant, Zixtal finally said. This principle, it seems inefficient, perhaps even detrimental to immediate survival. Chen smiled slightly. With respect, Commander, we've survived this long precisely because of such principles, not in spite of them. A society that sacrifices its vulnerable members for convenience or advantage isn't really surviving. It's just postponing its own moral death. As the Eternal Seekers set course for the nearest human colony, Zixtol composed their official report to the Galactic Federation. How does one explain a species that defies conventional survival logic, yet thrives? How does one quantify the strength found in self-sacrifice? In the end, Zixtol wrote simply, humanity's greatest power may lie not in their technology or their resilience, but in their willingness to measure victory not by who survives, but by who they save. The report would eventually reach the highest levels of the Federation Council, sparking debates that would last generations. But for now, as Zixtol watched Lieutenant Chen comfort another family's child while nursing her own injuries, they began to understand that perhaps humanity had discovered a different kind of strength, one that their own civilization had never thought to measure. The question of strength. High Counselor Nax of the Galactic Federation stood before the assembled representatives, their tentacles rippling with barely contained agitation. The Grand Chamber of the Stellar Council was unusually full today, with representatives from over 300 species gathered to discuss Scout Commander Zixtol's report. This cannot be standard protocol, Nax declared, gesturing at the holographic display showing the evacuation data from the New Horizon incident. Perhaps this was an anomaly, a failure of command structure in a moment of crisis. Ambassador Krell of the warrior clans clicked their mandibles in agreement. It defies evolutionary logic. No species achieves spacefaring status by protecting its weakest members at the expense of its strongest. The chamber's attention shifted as a small, elderly human woman walked to the central podium. Dr. Elizabeth Santos, Earth's senior xenanthropologist, had been called to testify about human evacuation protocols. Her white hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and despite her diminutive size, she commanded attention with quiet confidence. Distinguished members of the council, she began, her voice clear and steady. What you perceive as an anomaly is, in fact, one of humanity's oldest and most honored traditions. The principle of women and children first dates back to the sinking of the HMS Birkenhead in 1852, though similar ideals existed even before then. The holographic display shifted to show historical images, burning ships, space stations in crisis, colony evacuations. In each, the pattern repeated, the vulnerable evacuated first, the strong staying behind to ensure others' survival. But surely, interrupted Representative Vex of the Silicon Consciousness, their photonic matrix flickering with confusion, this has resulted in significant losses of valuable genetic and intellectual resources over your species' history. Dr. Santos smiled gently. You assume that strength lies only in immediate survival capability. Let me share a different perspective. She gestured, and the display changed to show a young girl in a historical photograph. This is my great-grandmother, evacuated from Earth during the climate crisis of 2042. She was 8 years old when a military transport chose to evacuate her refugee camp instead of a nearby military installation. The chamber stirred with murmurs as she continued. That girl grew up to develop the atmospheric reclamation technology that made Mars habitable. The children we save today may hold the solutions to problems we haven't even encountered yet. Ambassador Krell leaned forward. But what of your warriors? Your leaders? The ones who stay behind? They make their choice freely, Santos replied. And in doing so, they create something more powerful than mere survival. They create a legacy of sacrifice that shapes our entire civilization. When those children grow up knowing someone gave their life to save them, it fundamentally changes how they view their responsibility to others. A new figure approached the podium. Lieutenant Sarah Chen, still bearing the scars from the New Horizon incident. She stood beside Dr. Santos, her uniform crisp despite her obvious discomfort with the formal setting. 3 weeks ago, Chen began, I watched Captain Rodriguez ensure the last civilian pod launched before the scared Dominion's final attack. He could have taken that spot. Instead, he gave it to an elderly historian and her granddaughter. She paused, composing herself. That historian was carrying 3 decades of research on first contact protocols. Her granddaughter just enrolled in the Federation Diplomatic Academy. The chamber fell silent as the implications sank in. High Counselor, Nax's tentacles stilled. You're suggesting that this sacrifice, actually strengthens your species. Strength isn't just about surviving, Dr. Santos explained. It's about ensuring that what we value most continues beyond us. Every time we choose to protect our vulnerable members, we reaffirm what makes us human. And those who are saved carry that lesson forward, shaping future generations. Ambassador Krell chittered thoughtfully. Our historical records show that humanity has faced multiple extinction-level events, yet always recovered. Perhaps this is why. It's more than recovery, Lieutenant Chen added. Each time humanity faces a crisis, we emerge with our principles intact, because we don't just pass on our genes or our knowledge, we pass on our values. The debate continued for hours, but something had shifted in the chamber. Representatives who had arrived skeptical began asking different questions. Instead of questioning why humans protected their vulnerable, they began asking how this principle had shaped human technological and social development. As the session concluded, Dr. Santos shared one final thought. The true measure of a civilization's strength isn't in how many of its people can survive a crisis. It's in how many of its people will sacrifice everything to ensure others survive. By this measure, humanity isn't just strong. We're unshakable. The council chambers buzzed with discussion long into the night cycle. Across the galaxy, species began examining their own evacuation protocols, their own definitions of strength, and in a small observation room, Scout Commander Zixtal's crystalline form glowed with a new understanding. Perhaps humanity's greatest contribution to the galaxy wouldn't be their technology or their resilience, but their fundamental reimagining of what it means to be strong. Learning humanity. Professor Kavor of the Galactic Anthropological Institute had spent decades studying emergent civilizations, but nothing had prepared them for their current research. Their scaled hands moved swiftly over the holographic controls as they reviewed historical footage of human disasters, rescues, and evacuations. Computer, play footage sequence 2157A. Titan Colony Incident. Kavor commanded, their inner eyelids blinking rapidly as new data filled the room. The holographic display showed a massive dome cracking under Titan's toxic atmosphere. As emergency protocols activated, Kavor watched with fascination as human rescue workers guided colonists to safety. There it was again, the pattern. The elderly, the injured, the children evacuated first. The strong staying behind. Professor, a soft chime announced the arrival of their research assistant, a young synthoid named Echo. The human representative has arrived for the interview. Kavor turned to find Dr. Elizabeth Santos entering their research chamber, accompanied by a tall human male wearing a rescue worker's uniform. Dr. Santos, Commander Bradley, thank you for coming. Kavor greeted them, their scales shifting to a respectful blue-green. Your insights have been invaluable to our research. Commander James Bradley nodded, his weathered face bearing the marks of someone who had seen too many disasters and saved too few lives. Happy to help, Professor. Though I'm not sure why our evacuation protocols warrant such intense study. Kavor activated another holographic display, showing multiple rescue operations from different species across the galaxy. Observe the patterns. The Hive Collective preserves their queens. The Silicon Consciousness prioritizes their primary processing cores. The warrior clans save their strongest fighters. The images shifted to human rescue operations. But humans consistently prioritize those who might be considered least essential to immediate survival. Least essential. Commander Bradley's voice carried an edge. With respect, Professor, I don't think you understand what we're preserving. Dr. Santos stepped forward, her gentle demeanor masking the steel in her words. Perhaps, Commander, you could share your experience from the Mars dome collapse. Bradley was quiet for a moment, his eyes distant. We had 18 minutes before total structural failure. Standard procedure. Children, elderly, and injured first. I remember this kid. Couldn't have been more than 6. He was crying. Didn't want to leave his grandfather behind, who'd given up his spot in the early shuttles to help others evacuate. Kavor's scales rippled with interest. The grandfather chose to remain despite being in a priority evacuation category. He was a teacher, Bradley continued. Said his students needed him. That kid who didn't want to leave him. She just graduated top of her class in structural engineering. Designed the new dome reinforcement systems we're using colony-wide now. Echo, the Synthoid assistant, spoke up. But this defies optimal probability calculations. The grandfather's experience and knowledge could have been preserved. That's exactly what was preserved, Dr. Santos interrupted gently. Not just knowledge, but the understanding of how to use it. That child learned more from her grandfather's sacrifice than she ever could from his survival. Kavor moved to another display, showing data from dozens of human rescue operations. We've noticed something fascinating. Species that prioritize their strongest often recover quickly from disasters, but show minimal social evolution. However, human colonies that have faced such crises often demonstrate remarkable advances in both technology and social cooperation in the following generations. It's not just about who we save, Commander Bradley explained, running a hand through his graying hair. It's about what we teach in the moment of crisis. Every time we evacuate the vulnerable first, we're showing our children what we value most. Echo's photoreceptors flickered. But the statistical loss of experience personal can't be measured against the moral gain, Dr. Santos finished. Every child who witnesses an adult sacrifice their safety for others learns something vital about what it means to be human. 4 activated one final recording. Footage from the New Horizon incident. Lieutenant Chen's voice came through clearly as she helped children into escape pods while the ship's hull crackled with structural warnings. You see, Kavor said, their scales now a deep purple of revelation. What fascinates us is not just the protocol itself, but its effects. Other species enforce sacrifice through hierarchy or biological imperative. Humans choose it, again and again, even when given other options. Commander Bradley watched the footage, his expression solemn. Because we understand something fundamental about survival. It's not just about keeping our species alive. It's about keeping our humanity alive. As the interview concluded, Kavor made their final notes. Echo, processing the new data, asked what seemed to them a logical question. Professor, given the success of this human protocol, should we recommend its adoption by other species? Kavor was quiet for a moment, considering. Echo, I don't believe this is something that can be simply adopted. It must be understood, internalized, believed. What we're seeing isn't just a protocol. It's the physical manifestation of a deeper truth about strength and sacrifice that humanity has woven into the very fabric of their civilization. The professor looked out their window at the bustling galactic capital below, where representatives of countless species went about their daily lives. Perhaps the question isn't whether other species should adopt this protocol, but whether we're ready to learn what humanity has been teaching all along. That true strength lies not in who we preserve, but in what we're willing to sacrifice to preserve others. The Siege of Nova Haven. The Nova Haven colony shimmered like a jewel against the rust-red landscape of Kepler 186f, its massive environmental domes reflecting the light of the distant sun. But today, those domes weren't just holding back the planet's toxic atmosphere. They were the last line of defense against an impending disaster. Fleet Admiral Rixes of the warrior clans watched from the bridge of his flagship as his sensors tracked the approaching Skurd Dominion fleet. The same raiders who had attacked the New Horizon had returned, this time with a larger force. Status of the evacuation. Rixes demanded, his mandibles clicking with tension. Nova Haven reports they can only evacuate 60% of their population with available transport, his second-in-command reported. They're requesting our assistance in determining evacuation priorities. Rixes felt the weight of the moment. His people had been among the first to form an alliance with humanity after the New Horizon incident, fascinated by their unique approach to crisis response. Now, that alliance would be tested. "Open a channel to the colony," he ordered. Governor Sarah Chen, the former lieutenant from the New Horizon, appeared on the screen. 3 years had passed since that incident, and she now led one of humanity's most ambitious colonial projects. "Admiral Rixus," she greeted him, her calm demeanor belying the chaos visible behind her. "Thank you for responding to our distress call. Governor, my fleet can buy you 2 hours at most. We've analyzed your transport capacity." He hesitated. "Governor, with your permission, my tactical team has prepared an evacuation priority list based on preserving essential personnel and leadership." Chen's expression remained neutral, but her voice carried steel. "Thank you, Admiral, but we'll be implementing standard human evacuation protocols." Rixus felt his mandibles twitch. "Governor, with respect, I've studied the New Horizon incident. This situation is different. Nova Haven is humanity's most advanced research colony. The scientific knowledge here is worthless without our principles." Chen finished. "Admiral, do you know what we're researching here?" The question caught him off guard. "Your colony specializes in xenobiology and cross-species medical research." "Correct. And do you know why we chose this location, despite its hostile environment?" She gestured to a group of aliens visible behind her, members of various species working alongside humans in the colony's medical center. "Because the atmospheric composition here creates unique conditions for developing treatments that work across species barriers. Every breakthrough we make here saves lives throughout the galaxy." Understanding dawned on Rixus. "Your research, it's not just for humans." "No, it's not. And neither are our principles." Chen turned to issue orders to her staff, then faced Rixus again. "We're implementing our evacuation protocols now. Children first, then elderly and injured of all species, then general population. Essential personnel and leadership last. But your researchers, their knowledge, is being transferred to secure databases even as we speak. But knowledge isn't our most valuable export, Admiral. Our values are." As if to emphasize her point, the view behind her showed the first wave of evacuees being led to transport ships, children of various species, helped by human adults who showed no signs of leaving themselves. Rixus watched as a warrior clan elder, who had been working as a cultural exchange advisor, was gently but firmly directed to an evacuation transport by a young human security officer. The elder's protest was clear even through the view screen. "My warrior's honor demands I stay." The human officer's response carried clearly. "Your wisdom demands we save you." Something shifted in Rixus' understanding. He turned to his tactical officer. "Redirect 30% of our fighter screen to transport protection. Priority coverage to civilian evacuation vessels." "Sir," his second-in-command questioned, "that will significantly reduce our combat effectiveness." "Yes," Rixus replied, his mandibles set in determination, "but it will increase our effectiveness at what matters most." He turned back to the view screen. "Governor Chen, the warrior clans stand with Nova Haven, not just in battle, but in principle." Chen's smile was tired but genuine. "Thank you, Admiral. Now shall we show the scared Dominion what real strength looks like?" The next 2 hours would become legendary in galactic history. The combined fleet of the warrior clans fought with unprecedented coordination, protecting evacuation ships while Nova Haven's remaining defenders held the line. Human researchers worked alongside alien colleagues, transferring critical data while ensuring their most vulnerable members reached safety first. When the scared Dominion finally breached Nova Haven's outer defenses, they found something unexpected. The colony's leadership, human and alien alike, had remained behind, working to save not just lives or knowledge, but something far more precious: the principle that true civilization is measured not by the strength of its warriors, but by the depth of its compassion. As the last civilian transport jumped to safety, Governor Chen stood in her command center, surrounded by those who had chosen to remain. human security officers, alien researchers, and even a few warrior clan volunteers who had adopted humanity's principles as their own. Nova Haven stands. She broadcast on all frequencies, her voice carrying across the void to friend and foe alike, not in its structures or its location, but in what we choose to preserve. You may take this colony, but you cannot take what makes us who we are. Admiral Rixus, watching from his command ship as it covered the final evacuations, finally understood what his people had been missing in all their centuries of warrior tradition. Strength wasn't about who could fight the hardest or survive the longest. It was about what you chose to protect, what you were willing to sacrifice everything to preserve. The siege of Nova Haven would change more than just military doctrine. It would become a testament to how humanity's most fundamental principle could transform even the most warrior-like of cultures. For in choosing to protect the vulnerable first, they had demonstrated a strength that no weapon could match. The power to inspire others to be their best selves. A new understanding. 20 years after the siege of Nova Haven, the Great Hall of the Galactic Federation had been transformed. Where once stood only the traditional power symbols of various species, now a new monument dominated the entrance, a simple rescue pod from the New Horizon, preserved as a reminder of the day humanity changed the galaxy's understanding of strength. Professor Kavor, now elderly but still sharp-minded, stood before a gathering of representatives from across known space. Their scales, once vibrant blue-green, had faded to a dignified silver, but their voice remained strong as they addressed the assembly. 2 decades ago, we witnessed something we thought impossible: the voluntary adoption of human evacuation protocols by non-human species. Today, we gather to measure the impact of that change. The holographic displays activated, showing statistics and images from countless worlds. Warrior clan ships now carried dedicated civilian evacuation pods. The Silicon consciousness had reprogrammed its survival priorities to protect developing AI clusters rather than just primary cores. Even the Hive Collective had modified its genetic imperatives to protect all members, not just its queens. But the numbers tell only part of the story, Kavor continued. The true change lies deeper. The doors of the Great Hall opened, and a procession entered. Leading them was an elderly Sarah Chen, former governor of Nova Haven, now serving as Earth's ambassador to the Federation. Behind her walked beings from dozens of species, children saved from various disasters over the past 20 years, now grown into leaders, scientists, and diplomats themselves. Among them was a young warrior clan member, his mandibles bearing the traditional marks of a scholar rather than a warrior. He stepped forward to speak. "I am Crix, son of Admiral Rixus," he announced. 20 years ago, my father learned from humans that true strength lies not in the ability to destroy, but in the willingness to preserve. He died defending an evacuation of civilian scientists during the 3rd Nova Haven relief mission. I live by his example, not as a warrior, but as a xenobiologist, working to protect life in all its forms. Ambassador Chen, her hair now white but her eyes still bright, addressed the assembly next. When we first entered galactic society, many questioned our methods, called them inefficient, illogical. Yet here we stand, witness to something remarkable. The spread of an idea more powerful than any weapon, more enduring than any empire. The holographic displays shifted to show scenes from recent crises across the galaxy. In each one, the pattern was the same: the strong protecting the vulnerable, not because of rules or regulations, but because they chose to. A synthoid representative, their photoreceptors glowing softly, spoke up. We had always calculated survival based on computational value. But humans taught us to factor in potential, not just what someone is, but what they might become. The assembly fell silent as new footage appeared, a recent rescue operation on a distant mining colony. There, warrior clan troops worked alongside human emergency responders, evacuating children and elderly of all species, while colony leaders coordinated from the ground, refusing to leave until all others were safe. Professor Kavor's scales shifted to a deep purple of emotion. What we witness here is more than an evacuation protocol. It is the evolution of an idea. That civilization itself is measured not by the power of its strongest members, but by how it treats its most vulnerable. Ambassador Chen stood again, her voice carrying the weight of decades of experience. When we first made contact with Galactic society, we were asked why we would risk our strongest to save our weakest. Now, 20 years later, I ask you, who among us is truly weak? The child who might grow up to cure diseases, the elder whose wisdom guides generations, the injured whose recovery might inspire millions. She gestured to the assembled beings, each with their own story of survival, sacrifice, and growth. We humans didn't just bring a protocol to the galaxy. We brought a question. What kind of people do we want to be? And the answer, it seems, is the same across all species. We want to be better than mere survival instinct would dictate. We want to be worthy of those who sacrificed for us. The Great Hall resonated with a deep chime, an ancient signal of unanimous agreement. Species that had once seen each other only as competitors or potential threats now stood united in a deeper understanding of strength and civilization. As the assembly concluded, Professor Kavor made their final observation in the official record. 20 years ago, humanity showed us that true strength lies not in who we save, but in who we're willing to become to save others. Today, we see that lesson echoed across the galaxy, not as a human principle, but as a universal truth. We are all stronger not because we survived, but because we learned to value something greater than survival itself. Outside the Great Hall, the stars shone on a changed galaxy. In ship halls and colony domes, in research stations and trading posts, beings of all species now lived by a principle that had once seemed uniquely human. They had learned that civilization advances not through the preservation of the strongest, but through the strength found in preserving all. And in orbit above Earth, a new generation of rescue ships prepared to launch their crews composed of humans and aliens alike, all united in a single understanding, that in choosing to protect the vulnerable, they had found a power greater than any weapon. The power to transform not just who survives, but who they become in the act of survival.